Welcome to Fixation Rotation. My name is Jessica,
And my name's Sarah.
and we're so excited because it's our first episode. Woo!
Excited to be back into the world of podcasting after a 1.5 year hiatus.
Yeah, it feels, I was telling Sarah earlier, it feels a lot longer because I had a baby and the days are long. The days are long. Okay, this is so exciting. We're going to be rusty for the first few episodes.
A little crusty, a little rusty, but we are back.
Rusty, no.
That is not going to be the tagline. Absolutely not.
We're crusty and rusty. Okay.
The rotation is slow.
The gears are not gearing right now, but if you want to follow us on social media,
You can find us at Fixation Rotation Pod on Instagram. And you might already be following us because we have transitioned over from our previous podcast, which was You Can't Get to Heaven in a Mini Skirt.
yes, and now we're Fixation Rotation, which is so exciting.
So, Jessica, this week, what did you fixate on?
Sarah, I fixated on radium. What do you know about radium? What comes to mind when you hear radium?
It's radioactive, potentially. Is it in the periodic table?
Yes, it is.
Hey,
Good job.
guys, grade 12 chemistry
Congratulations.
coming through. It's only been 20 years.
It is on the periodic table of elements.
Is it radioactive?
It is number 88, and yes, it's radioactive.
And is the symbol Ra?
It
Or RD?
is. All right.
Okay.
You got it the first time. Don't doubt yourself, girl. Don't doubt yourself. So, radium. The reason that I chose this subject was because a few months ago I read a book called Radium Girls.
Okay.
And I think I've already told you about this, Sarah, separately, but it is a very good book. And I would highly recommend anyone listening to check it out. I got it from my local library.
Okay, so radium. We've established that it is an element, and that's literally all I know.
Okay. All right. So we're going to start, we're going to go on a journey, Sarah, because I have like a lot of different elements to this episode. We're going to talk about how radiation was discovered.
Elements to the element?
Yes, we're going to talk about how radiation was discovered. That's when I pay you the big bucks. And we're going to talk about the Radium Girls. We're going to talk about what the Radium Girls did for labor laws in the United States specifically, but also in the world. So radium itself, like you said, is an actual chemical element. It is on the periodic table. It produces radiation. Radiation itself is energy or tiny particles being shot out from something. So it's just like constantly shooting out radiation. So radium and radiation, two different things, but within the same vein. Radiation itself isn't a substance that you can bottle like a liquid. It's energy in motion. But radium is a physical material, which can be ground into paint, dissolved into tonics, and mixed into face creams. And I say that now because we're going to come back to that.
Okay.
Yes, which is pretty dark. So radiation happens when atoms are unstable and they attempt to get rid of the extra energy it has. And the way it does it is by shooting out tiny bits of energy or tiny particles, which is radiation. And this happens with the element radium. Some radiation is more powerful than others, and some is harmless. So if you think about harmless radiation, they also call it non-ionizing radiation.
Would that be like standing outside of your microwave? Remember
Yes.
when we like in the 90s, they're like, don't stand in front of the microwave because radiation.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't have enough energy to actually break down DNA or mess with molecular bonds, so it's pretty harmless, especially in small doses, like things like Wi-Fi routers. But I'm sure there's people out there who think Wi-Fi routers are bad for you. And prolonged exposure to some things might be an issue, but it isn't going to completely remove an electron from an atom or a molecule, which is like very bad. It's not going to break down your DNA. It has a lower frequency and a longer wavelength than ionizing radiation.
Okay.
So it's not all harmful, but we're going to talk about the harmful one today because the non-harmful ones are boring. And we're here to talk about our fixations. There are 3 different types of radiation rays that come out of radium. So we got alpha radiation. So this is where we're going to get scientific, but it's 2 protons and 2 neutrons bound together. And it's relatively massive. And because of that, it reacts really strongly with matter. Oh, Sarah's doing a little. Sarah's doing. Go to YouTube. She has the examples with her fingers. They're quite massive. They deposit a large amount of energy over a short distance. So with alpha radiation, if it gets inside the body, it can cause really intense localized DNA damage and cell death. However, it's really easy to block. So you could literally block it with like a sheet of paper or a layer of dead skin. So it like never gets in your body essentially, except for a future part of this episode that we'll talk about because it's like it particularly very devastating. And it only travels a short distance. So it doesn't have to go far, but it can cause a ton of damage.
Would it be like if you ingested it?
Yeah, if you ingested it.
Okay.
And you'll see that when we talk about the radium girls.
Okay.
So beta particles, they're much lighter. They're also smaller and faster, and they can travel further. But because they travel a little further, they don't cause as much localized damage, but they still cause a lot of damage. Beta radiation can burn skin with enough exposure. Inside the body, if you ingest it somehow, it can cause damage, but it spreads its energy over a slightly longer path than alpha rays. Then we have gamma radiation. So gamma rays are not particles. They're actually pure energy, high frequency electromagnetic waves. So they're like light, but they're much more energetic. And they travel really far and they penetrate really deeply. So they're probably, I would say, the most dangerous one. To block them, you need really thick lead or concrete.
Oh, shit.
Yeah. So like sometimes radioactive things are put in lead boxes for that reason. It will block all the rays, including the gamma rays. It spreads energy more broadly than alpha and beta because it penetrates deeply. But because it penetrates so deeply, it can expose internal organs, even if the source is outside the body. So it penetrates way deeper. So radium itself, it emits all of these. Alpha radiation can cause severe localized damage, and gamma radiation contributes to broader exposure. And those two things will be important later.
Okay.
So that was your science lesson for today. How do you feel?
I feel like radium is a triple threat.
Oh,
We got alpha, we got beta, we got gamma.
yeah, we do. We have all three.
And that is my glazed over explanation of what you just said for the past 4 minutes.
You know what? That was a good explanation, and I could have just said that, and we could have just moved right on.
But I feel like it's fun. It's fun to kind of hear like what's gonna happen. It's a little
It's
dramatic.
fun to learn. It's fun to
Yeah,
learn. That's
I
why
love
we're doing
learning.
this. I love to learn. And honestly, it was kind of funny. I don't remember any of that from high school chemistry, which I feel like I probably should have at least had a little bit of a memory, but it was done.
So
Moving on with radiation, radiation. So I wanted to first just really like dip our toes into like what has radiation done for humanity?
ooh, I have one.
Okay, what?
Microwave background radiation, how they discovered the Big Bang. So exciting.
Well, there you go. Do you want to expand on that or is that it?
They were able to be like, what is all of this? And then they traced all the particles back to the original particle. And then they knew that there was no God.
I don't think we should be teaching anyone anything. Okay. First, I have 4 notable history events that have to do with radiation.
Okay.
To really submerge ourselves in the culture of radiation. So the first one, probably I would say the most famous one is Chernobyl. So that was in 1986. Okay, I already know the answer to this question, Sarah, but have you seen the HBO series Chernobyl?
Nope.
God damn it. Okay. Another tangent coming because Sarah hasn't seen anything that you need to start a list. Actually, I've decided because I knew going into this episode that you hadn't seen Chernobyl, and I was like, she's gonna start a list now of all the shows that I suggest for you that you need to watch. Anyone who's listening who has not seen Chernobyl on HBO, like run, don't walk. It is so good. So it goes through the entire series of events surrounding Chernobyl,
Yes.
and you would love it, Sarah. You would love it. So I'm so sorry. I get really passionate when I talk about Chernobyl.
It's okay. Passion about radiation is a good thing.
So the event itself, we're not going to talk about the HBO show, but the event of Chernobyl itself is probably the most famous nuclear accident in history. It happened in Soviet Ukraine in 86. A reactor exploded during a botched safety test. As you will see if you watch HBO's Chernobyl, a sudden power surge caused an explosion and blasted radioactive material into the atmosphere. And it like stayed open and pumped radiation into the atmosphere for a very long time. And then they eventually put a dome on top of it. I'm going to move on to the next events with radiation. The next one would be the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant disaster. That happened in 2011. An earthquake and tsunami struck Japan, and the nuclear power plant essentially melted down. But it was relatively recent. There weren't any immediate radiation deaths because they were able to evacuate, but there was still like a ton of social and health consequences to the area. And the radiation that was released into the air was like much lower than Chernobyl. I'm assuming they probably got it dealt with faster, had something more in place. Those are two specifically nuclear power plant disasters, but there's another one that is lesser known, but I came across it in my studies and I found it really interesting. It's just like, so this will be just like a little story for you. It's a little story.
Was it in the book originally or no?
In Radium Girls?
Yeah.
No, this was not. So this is called the Guyana account. It happened in 1987. Okay. So it's a lesser known incident. So it happened in Brazil. There was a private radiotherapy institute that moved premises. And when it did, it left behind a radiotherapy unit that contained something known as cesium-137. I think it's like a really common element used in hospital equipment.
Okay.
So there was a dispute between who owned the land that this abandoned institute was on. And so that specific machine stayed there for quite a while. And then one night, two men went into the abandoned factory and stole it to try to sell the scrap metal, but they didn't know what it was. They started disassembling it, and they discovered a glowing blue light, which was the radioactive bit, of course. And they started sticking a screwdriver into it and digging it out. And then they shared it with family and friends, and like people were playing with it. I know, it's sad.
It was like when people used to play with like balls of mercury. They're like, oh, this is so cool.
I know. All of this random stuff gets worse before it gets better, Sarah. In the end, 249 people were found to be contaminated, but just found to be contaminated. 4 people died. It ended up not being as much of a disaster because a lot of people actually survived the high dose of radium that they were exposed to because they thought maybe the dose was fractionated, which means the total dose was separated into smaller doses. But because it was fractionated, it gave the cells time to recover, to reverse the damage before more cells were damaged, and then people were able to survive. I don't know about long-term effects that they had, but in terms of immediate death.
I love that for their cells. It's good.
So that's number 3. The last incident that I'll just touch on really quick is Hiroshima and Nagasaki atomic bombs, because it kind of goes to show that a discovery of something that is potentially life-saving for somebody can be so devastating as well. Speaking of discovery, we're moving on to the next section, which is discovery.
Okay.
And I'm going to ask you, Sarah, do you know who discovered radiation and radium?
The wife of the person that you're going to mention.
No. But I'm only going to talk about the wife. The husband is so secondary in the story. So it was discovered on December 21st, 1898 by Marie Curie and Pierre Curie.
Okay, but like without deviating from our current theme, there were a lot of times when there were perhaps men throughout history that discovered things and may or may not have locked their wives in a room and forced them to work for no money to further the scientific or literary pursuit.
Allegedly, this might have happened. I don't know.
But yeah, Marie Curie, absolute goat in her own right. For those of you who don't know, it is greatest of all time.
Yeah.
Learned that during heated rivalry.
Yes. I can't believe Sarah has just learned goat. It is 2026, people. So Marie Curie and Pierre Curie, I'm going to mostly talk about just the discovery of radium itself, but Marie Curie's life is so interesting. She grew up in a time when there was no higher education for women, and she ended up making one of the greatest discoveries of all time. For context, she was born in Warsaw. At the time, it was in the Congress Poland of the Russian Empire, and women were barred from higher education in Poland at that time. And she did not seem to be concerned that she belonged to the quote-unquote weaker sex. And I read another book for this episode about Marie called Obsessive Genius. There was a quote from the book that I wanted to talk about. It says, quote, okay, a popular book of the day was titled The Physiological Feeble-Mindedness of Women. Among the upper classes, a good way to rid oneself of an independent-minded wife was to confine her to an insane asylum. A French critic wrote that a woman's place is simply for sex and to reproduce. I mean, I don't know how much like her family or people around her really believe that, but that was a huge part of society at the time in various places in Europe and I'm sure in North America. I just like really wanted to drive that home that it's just wild what she ended up accomplishing. So one thing about Marie Curie is that she battled with depression, like
Okay.
severe depression her whole life.
Wow.
It doesn't come up again in the episode, but I just wanted to point that out there because I also found that really interesting. So Marie and her sister made a deal that Marie would work in order to pay for her sister's medical studies in Paris. And then when she was done, her sister would work to help Marie with her studies.
That's so cool. So her sister was a doctor?
Her sister was a doctor, also in a time where women were barred from higher education in Poland. So they obviously went away to go to school. But before this, her and her sister attended something called the Flying University because women in this time were not allowed to enter university. They wanted to obtain higher education. So there was this clandestine university that was created. So there's a quote from the book, the Obsessive Genius book. I will just read the quote because it kind of sums it up. A Polish positivist started a clandestine academy for the higher education of women, and within the year, it had enrolled over 200 women who met in secret. After a few months, they were discovered by the Russians, and most of the teachers were exiled. This served as a challenge. In the next 3 years, the academy became known as the Flying University with over 1,000 women enrolled, Marie and her sister among them.
It's so like crazy to think of that concept. Like the other day, this is like a little tangent, but there was a book that my 9-year-old was reading called Hoops, and it was about like in the 1970s, a female basketball team at a university that didn't have the same funding as a men's team, and they wanted to raise money so that they could go to some competition or tournament. And then we were having a discussion about that, and I was saying my grandmothers were really discouraged from going on to higher education, and, like, I was from, like, a privileged class where my grandmothers both had university degrees, which wasn't really typical, and, like I said, that, like, our mom's generation was the first to really be able to get credit cards and their own bank accounts, and my daughter was just, like, blown away by that.
Oh,
But it's so strange that, like, we're having these conversations, and currently in Afghanistan, women cannot attend high school or post-secondary.
yeah.
Like, it's weird to be like, we lived these lives, but in parallel, history is just repeating itself in other places.
Yes. So once her sister completed her studies in medicine and Marie decided to continue her higher education, she moved to Paris. She rented what's called a garret, which is a tiny attic space. And I saw like a picture of what this might look like, and it looked fucking depressing. It just makes you so happy that you have your creature comforts of today. And she pursued her studies in Paris. And she was so obsessive about her studies that she didn't even care where she lived. And she barely ate. She didn't take care of herself. Like, it's just, she was so honed in on getting this degree and doing her studies. So then she met Pierre Curie when she was studying at Sorbonne. He had actually already made some significant scientific discoveries at this point. And him and his brother had discovered something called piezoelectricity. This is interesting. Piezoelectricity is the electric charge in certain minerals, such as some crystals. We love crystals. That happens in response to some mechanical stress. This discovery, piezoelectricity, which I didn't even know about, but it's given us things like sonar, ultrasound, cell phones, television tubes, electrical appliances,
Whoa.
and interestingly, quartz watches. So the way that quartz watches work is that there's a continuous electric voltage applied to the crystal by a battery, and it creates piezoelectric pressure, which causes the quartz to vibrate and makes the watch keep time.
Whoa.
I know,
That's really
science.
cool.
He, at this point, has discovered this.
Okay, so we like Pierre.
We do like Pierre. We do. Pierre's nice, and he doesn't lock his wife in a room and steal her ideas. In fact, he does the opposite. Pierre is kind of like this legit guy, loves Marie. They eventually marry. But, lots happens, but I'm going to skip to the part where they discover radium because that's why we're here today. In the span of a year, Marie discovers polonium and radium. So polonium is also on the periodic table.
Is it PO or
It,
POL?
it's PO. Good job, Sarah.
Look at me.
Also a radioactive substance. So they discovered radium in 1898. So 2 years before, a scientist named Henry Becquerel discovered that uranium salt was fogging photographic plates that he had in a drawer. So even in the dark, it was fogging these photographic plates. So he knew that there was some kind of invisible energy coming from the uranium salt, but he didn't really expand on what they might be. But then he just published his findings. And then Marie, that's where the Curies come in. They became obsessed with this. I think particularly Marie, and Pierre he seems to be more like her champion. And she's kind of like this driving force. Like that's what I kind of got out of it. But I'll say Marie and Pierre because they did technically discover it together. So they became obsessed with this and asked whether the invisible ray could be measured. So she discovered that element called uraninite, aka pitchblende, which is a uranium-rich ore. It contained an unknown substance even when the uranium was removed. So she could tell that there must be something else in there. And it was because it was way more radioactive than pure uranium should have been. They knew they needed to get a bunch of pitchblende for testing. So this is the uranium-rich ore. They needed to get a bunch of that. They needed to test it a bunch. They ended up being able to get a massive shipment to their lab, which, okay, their lab at the time, this is crazy. It was a decrepit old shed that looked like a rundown stable. It was actually an abandoned medical school dissecting room with no insulation.
So basically Jessica's podcast room.
Our podcast room. But it had a leaking glass roof. At least I have a roof over my head. It might be moldy, but here we are.
Okay.
Yeah, like imagine these like famous scientists, obviously at the time, maybe they weren't famous, but like they're in this like essentially decrepit
Dissecting room.
Yeah, an old medical dissecting room from the 1800s. Like, ugh. This is where they were. Very poor conditions. The way that Marie started experimenting, well, she became obsessed with isolating this substance. Like she needed a massive amount of pitchblende because she needed to try to isolate the substance, which at this point she had called radium. So she had already made the name. She wanted to measure its mass so that it could go on the periodic table, essentially. They ended up having to hire people to help as it was like an impossible task. So this is the method. They had to dissolve the pitchblende in acid and then they boiled it and then they separated it again and again and again. So imagine, this is a good example. So imagine cooking soup, dumping it out, scraping the pot and starting over thousands of times. Thousands and thousands of times. So that this is like what they had to do in order to just get the tiniest little bit of radium. So they processed tons and tons and tons of pitchblende over the next year to get pure radium. Eventually, they isolated two new sources of intense radioactivity, one being polonium, and then the other was radium, which faintly glowed. And that is very interesting. It seems as though humans really like things that glow and we think that they're magical.
We like shiny things. We like glowy things.
Yes.
Absolutely.
So this is a glowy thing. According to her journal, she says, the substances were arranged on tables and boards. One of our joys was to go into our workroom at night. We then perceived on all sides the feebly luminous silhouettes of the bottles and capsules containing our products. It was really a lovely sight and one always new to us. The glowing tubes looked like faint fairy lights.
So romantic.
It is romantic, but the light was caused by radioactivity. They were obviously unaware that exposure was bad. And they're just walking around with like radioactive substances in their midst, being like, pretty light.
Was there like a demise?
Yeah. So at this point, Pierre was suffering from some health effects.
How old was he? Like
40? They're not very old.
They're not very old now.
No. So he had like rheumatism and just some achy joints, but he blamed it on the poor conditions in their lab, which like fair, because it looked horrible.
He's like, this shit is not ergonomic. Air quality is super poor.
I know.
I'm handling radiation with my bare hands.
And they were getting like radiation burns. Like this is not good. But they don't know. They have no clue. And
Yeah.
Marie is rapidly losing weight, which she had kind of done before because she'll get so obsessed with things that she won't eat. So they're kind of just like, it's just the conditions that we're working in.
I think Marie might have been neurodivergent. Armchair psychologist here, but like maybe.
Of course. I mean, you can't be a normie and do that. I mean, I'm sure there are normies that do that, but given her journals, given the books that I've read and the things I've read about her, yeah, definitely a bit of a neurodivergence in there. So they discover radium. In 1903, Pierre, Marie, and Henry Becquerel, so the original guy that discovered that maybe something really funky is going on with uranium salts,
Yeah.
they shared the Nobel Prize in physics for their experimentation on radium. Specifically, they won because they proved atoms could actually change and emit energy, and they weren't always just stagnant building blocks. So that was like the big discovery. This is where the drama comes in. Okay, this is where the sexism comes in.
Oh no. It's not Pierre. Is it Pierre?
No, it's not Pierre. Pierre does the
Thank
opposite.
God.
You will like Pierre.
Okay.
When the Nobel Committee initially planned to award this, they were only going to give it to Pierre and Henry because
Of course.
women can't do anything. Yeah. We're just there for sex and reproduction, and we should be put in an insane asylum. So Pierre actually found out about this. He pushed back. He insisted that Marie get included. He wrote to the committee, and they did relent. And then she became the first woman ever to win a Nobel Prize. Yay. Even so, though, this is where it sucks, not because of Pierre. Pierre did everything he could, but at the award ceremony in Stockholm, only Pierre was invited to give a lecture, and Marie was sidelined.
Of course.
Unfortunately, we do love Pierre, but in 1906, he died because he was struck by a horse-drawn vehicle. However, he would have died from radiation poisoning, for sure. But Marie lived another almost 30 years.
Okay.
And she died in 1934 from anemia, which was caused by long-term radiation exposure.
Girl needed some PPE.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what that is?
No.
Personal protective equipment.
PPE. Oh, PPE, of course. I thought you just said PP. Like, I don't know. Okay.
Did they have children?
Yeah, they did.
How many?
I think 2.
Boys or girls?
Girls.
What did the daughters do?
Okay, so they had 2 daughters. One, Irene. She was a scientist who won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1935.
Irene, okay. What for what?
On her work on artificial radioactivity.
Ooh.
So she continued the radioactivity stuff.
She loved that. She's a radium girl.
She is a radium girl. Okay, Eve Curie, a renowned writer, journalist, and pianist. A little something for you. There, 100 years later, the Curie's clothes, notes, and papers are still radioactive. So there's a little tidbit story for you.
Okay.
I am going to move on from Marie Curie's story because at this point, after the discovery of radium, the public became obsessed with it because it glows. Honestly,
we love shiny things.
We do love shiny things. And so the early 1900s, it was also just like a perfect storm because in the early 1900s, it kind of marked a time when society started to become obsessed with the idea of vitality. Is the beginning of wellness culture.
Oh, God.
Which honestly has never ended, and it's still awful. In 1903, a journalist from the New York Tribune asked Marie to comment on the possibility that radium could cure diseases, and she declined to comment. She did not want to get ahead of the science. Smart lady. But many others did. So in the early 1910s, there was some proof that radium would help with certain kinds of cancer, as we do know now. So, of course, as humans do, people took that information and assumed that radium must be healthy for you. Because why not?
Were people like microdosing radium?
Yes. Okay, we'll get there in a sec. I know. It gives me radium. Sorry, it's so true.
Can we just be on Joe Rogan's podcast right now?
Bro. A few examples of items that were sold. Luckily for consumers, a lot of them didn't actually contain radium. So that was good in the end that these people were charlatans because, oh my gosh. I have a few here listed. There's one called Thoradia. It was a company that made a cream with thorium chloride and radium bromide, as well as additional products such as toothpaste. If you look online, there are like pictures that there's a radium museum, and there's the face creams that have radium
So
in
what
it.
were the face creams purporting to do? Was it like anti-aging, glow? You're gonna glow.
You will have glowing. Yes, you will glow.
We all just want to glow.
We just want
I
everyone wants
mean,
to glow like a newborn baby.
it's
Glow.
weird.
That's all we've ever wanted. It was also used to market food and drinks, although luckily not a lot of them actually contain radium. There was a radium brand creamery butter, but it didn't actually contain any radium. So, whew. One of the most famous ones was called Radithor. It was an energy drink. So it was a concoction of radium-laced distilled water, and it was sold in half-ounce bottles for $1, which is close to $19 now.
That's
1 ounce.
wild. It's not
I
even
know.
like a 5-hour energy drink from the gas station that you get for like whatever amount of money now.
It's definitely not 20, though. That's
No.
definitely not $20. I know. And it's not even an energy drink because it's just radium. So it claimed to cure over 150 diseases, including impotence.
Man, people don't change. Algorithm, Tinder, internet, whatever. Nothing changes. It's all the
Nothing.
same.
It's all the same. History repeats itself,
crazy.
Sarah. It is one of the most infamous products made because there was a death of a guy named Eben Byers. Ebenezer, actually, is his full name.
Ebenezer is better than some names I've heard.
Yeah, of course. But we should bring back Ebenezer.
Ebenezer is actually not bad. Like Eb. Like
Eb.
imagine you're just like, oh, I was saying it was Eb. Or like
Eb.
Ezer.
Eben Byers, he was an American industrialist and socialite. He was very rich. His fortune came from his family business, the Girard Iron Company. In 1927, he injured himself by falling out of a railway sleeping berth, which is like a train bed. And he went to the doctor, and his doctor suggested to take Radithor, which was a patent medicine created by a man named William J.A. Bailey. And William J.E. Bailey, who is he, you say? He is a Harvard dropout who claimed to be a doctor to sell his concoction. And he was just a con man. And he created these 1 ounce bottles of radium-laced liquid and claimed that it would cure all diseases. So Eben Byers was like, this is my shit. And he drank 1,400 bottles in a 2-year span.
Shit.
He felt invigorated in the beginning.
No impotence?
Apparently, I don't know. I would be shocked, but placebo is a strong thing. He also fed it to his racehorses. So he originally started taking it in 19. I know this poor horse.
To his racehorse.
In 1927. So in 1930, he stopped consuming it because his teeth started falling out. I know.
If there's a red flag, it's when you have no teeth.
Might want to stop drinking the radium. He died of radiation poisoning 2 years later. And it was taken really seriously because, like, A, he's a man, he's a white man, and he was a rich man. So society loves to rally behind a rich white man. That still never ends either.
A rich, white, stupid man.
A rich, white, stupid man. Like I said, so his death was taken seriously. And the reason why that's interesting is because we're going to move on. Finally, we're going to talk about the Radium Girls. And
I've been waiting.
I know, I'm so sorry. I talked about it like it feels like an hour ago, and now we're actually getting into it. So for this episode, I read the book Radium Girls by Kate Moore. Highly recommend. It's actually quite harrowing. It's really heavy, but I'll give you an overview of the book. In 1913, physicians Sabin von Saucicki, that's a name, and George Willis, much easier, they founded a company in New Jersey called the Radium Luminous Materials Corporation. They had, at this point, invented a paint using radium that illuminated in the dark. So they used this paint to illuminate watch dials, which were obviously used on people's watches, but also on different instruments in, like, war times. So they were very popular in World War I and II.
They love a glow stick. Love a glow stick.
We love things that glow.
Like, are we bugs? Can we just say we're drawn to light? Like, is this not
And just end this episode at this point?
Yeah.
They opened a plant in Orange, New Jersey, and they hired a ton of girls to work as painters for watch dials. And it was a really coveted job because it paid really well. And this guy, von Saucicki, he studied under the Curies. So he absolutely knew the dangers of radium at this point, even if he knew that it just like caused like radium burn, but he was not stupid. And he told the general public and the girls that the paint was actually healthy.
Oh, no.
Each painter would mix their own paint using radium powder. The girls would use paintbrushes with the luminous paint and then paint watch dials all day with little tiny numbers and these really pointed paintbrushes. And the best way for them to get the most precise point on the paintbrush was to lick the paintbrushes to get a fine tip. So they licked it, dipped it in the paint, and then they painted the dial, and they called that lip pointing. Yes. Sarah looked horrified. You should be.
Very horrified right now.
After work, they would actually be glowing from the radium powder because it would just get everywhere. Like it just like puffs up and then it glows in the dark. There was radium dust all over the studio. They would walk home in the dark, actually glowing, and people would call them ghost girls. But like I said, I mean, this job was really lucrative and they didn't know it was unhealthy at all. So I can imagine this was like very cool.
Probably like one of the best jobs they could have gotten at the time, right? In the early 1900s. Like,
Oh, yeah.
there
Oh,
weren't
yeah.
a ton of options.
It said they got like paid, 3 times more than the average female factory worker. So I think
Oh, wow.
it was quite lucrative.
I feel like Bro definitely knew if he was paying them that well. No one pays an employee super well for no reason. I'm going to just like say that as a statement across the board.
I mean, that's a broad statement. So, side note on how horrible all of this was. So, a quote from Radium Girls. Maybe I'll get you to read this actually.
Okay. A local newspaper article in 1920 stated that the company had offloaded some of its industrial waste by selling it to the schools and playgrounds to use in their sandboxes. Kids' shoes turn white because of it. One child complained to his mother of a burning sensation in his hands, yet Von Sochaki pronounced the sand most hygienic for children to play in. Oh, God. That is dark.
That's bleak as fuck.
That is
Right.
so bleak.
I guess I wanted to include that quote because, the book's not really about anything but the Radium Girls, but that quote was kind of mind-blowing because it just goes to show that it wasn't just the Radium Girls that were affected. Like, they just didn't give a shit about the community around them. Now it's 1921 and World War I is over. The original girls who were working at the corporation started to experience some symptoms. They started getting some jaw pain, mouth sores, aches in their hips and feet, and they're obviously experiencing radium poisoning, as we now know, but at the time they had no idea what was going on, and the symptoms really varied among the girls. That's the one thing about this radiation poisoning, or maybe even different kinds of workplace occupational hazards, is that sometimes the symptoms in certain types of poisoning, they're completely different among everybody. So it can be really difficult to nail down. But I mean, it was also 1921. They didn't even know that this was dangerous. The local doctors around were really puzzled. They had no idea. The corporation claimed zero responsibility, of course, and reiterated that radium was actually healthy.
Yeah.
Interesting quote from Radium Girls. I will get you to read this too because this is also really bleak.
Love a bleak quote.
The whole book is pretty bleak.
But if you looked a little closer at all those positive publications, there was a common denominator. The researchers, on the whole, worked for radium firms. As radium was a rare and mysterious element, its commercial exploiters, in fact, controlled to an almost monopolizing extent its image and most of the knowledge about it. Many firms had their own radium-themed journals, which were distributed for each doctors, all full of optimistic research. The firms that profited from the radium medicine were the primary producers and publishers of the positive literature. Oh, man.
I mean, again,
That's dark.
It's dark. It happens now. It's so fucking typical.
Very, very human nature.
Yeah.
Not surprising.
The corporation's touting that this is healthy. They're saying that they have all this research, but the research is done by in-house people who some of them aren't even doctors. So anyway, the radium watch dial industry just trucked along. Even though some girls, no one had passed away yet, but there was a lot of mysterious illnesses going on. Meanwhile, while all the girls in New Jersey were starting to get sick, in Illinois, another company opened a plant with a whole new set of girls, completely different company. They had no idea the dangers of radiation poisoning. And just like New Jersey, this was a very lucrative job and it paid well. and the girls would glow from the radium dust. And you know what's so crazy is that the city was called Ottawa. Ottawa, Illinois. So there you go.
Crazy.
In 1922, so this is like a year later, one of the original painters in New Jersey died after a mysterious illness. We now know it's radiation poisoning, but her death certificate says she died of syphilis. The doctors were like, "You have syphilis." She literally was like, "I've never had sex, but okay." And that's what they put on her death certificate.
That is really fucked up.
At this point, the girls in New Jersey are starting to piece together that they're all having similar symptoms. So some of the symptoms were their jaws were either aching or just like straight up deteriorating, and pieces had to be removed. And when the jaw bones were removed, the bone was so decayed, it would fracture like an eggshell.
Jesus.
I know.
That's so sad.
Many couldn't walk anymore from the pain in their hips and joints. So like, because they were lip pointing, a lot of the symptoms were in their jaws. They had mouth sores and teeth. A lot of them had teeth falling out. And honestly, one of the craziest things that I read in that book that I still think about was one of the girls. She had written a letter and she's like, I can live with the aches and pains, but I do so hate to see my teeth fall out. And just like the kind of casualness in that sentence, I was like, you do so hate for your teeth to fall out. Like, I would be out of my fucking mind if my teeth were falling out.
Yes,
I do so hate.
absolutely yes. I know those jobs paid well, but like I don't think they did veneers that well back then.
The girls who have died at this point also had similar symptoms, the girls who were still alive. So the girls in New Jersey then pieced together what was happening and they began legal proceedings.
Okay.
And they were
Good for them.
the legal proceedings, yes, were painfully slow and super traumatic. The corporation kept stalling. And that's what's so tough because these girls their health is deteriorating so quickly. And they finally find a lawyer that will take them on. And then they finally get their day in court in 1928. There's 5 girls. They can barely sit upright. Their testimony is like totally gut wrenching. And the media then sympathizes with them, which ultimately forces the corporation to settle. They get a good settlement, but it's not about hitches. So this is like evil corporation shit. The corporation still forces the girls to get tests and treatments from their doctors. And the corporation knows at this point, by the way, they know for a fact that radium is killing these girls. And they're denying. Von Sachiki dies. He then, at this time, dies of radiation poisoning himself. And so the girls still have to go to the corporation's doctors to continuously get treatments and tests in order to continue getting their payouts. Basically just try to like wear them down so that the girls will stop taking the corporation's money. And the corporation's not taking any responsibility. So the lawsuits for the girls in Illinois, it ends up taking even longer because some girls band together and sue as well. And some girls still fight for their settlement into the 30s. So this just continues and continues.
My God.
So that's kind of like the end of this part. But I wanted to say, like, so how exactly did the radium kill these girls? What's the science behind that? We've already talked about alpha and gamma and beta particles. So if an alpha emitting material gets inside your body, like radium lodged in the bone, so basically their lip pointing, they're getting it into their mouth. And this is what's so weird. Their bodies think it's calcium. They treat it as if it's calcium and it gets deposited
so it's going into the bone.
Into their bones, mostly their jaw bones. The heavy particle dumps a lot of energy into a very tiny area, aka like the jaw, the mouth. It's like firing a cannonball inside a cell. So it's extremely damaging at a short range. And there were also gamma rays involved, which caused other issues outside the jaw issues. So the gamma rays were going through their bodies into their joints and caused all these issues. And that's what harmed the Radium Girls.
My God.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry for the bleak subject matter. But the last part of the episode right now, and the last part of the Radium Girls as well, is how did what they went through change the future? Because they didn't do all this for nothing. Luckily, it actually did help shape labor laws as we see them today. So especially in like the recognition of occupational diseases, The Illinois state governor signed into law the new Illinois Occupational Diseases Act, which took place in 1936. So it included provisions requiring employer coverage of industrial poisoning, which was a direct result from this case.
Wow.
So finally, like corporations, they had to take responsibility because if you think about like, we take all this so for granted that we have labor laws, but like there was a time when there
Yeah.
were none.
Oh, 100%. Even me like joking about PPE, like personal protective equipment,
I know.
like that was not always mandated.
Even when they knew that it was dangerous.
Yeah.
That's what's hard. Is like if they don't know it's dangerous, you know, understandable in a way. But for the Radium Girls, the people that would process the radium to give to the girls, the men in the lab, they were wearing lead aprons, so they knew.
Oh my God. Are we for like
Yes, we're for real.
that?
So they knew.
Of course, that just like adds a level of feminist anger to me right now, or feminine rage.
I know,
Because
sorry.
it's like, of course, women were seen as more disposable. But you know what? Of course, it was women that fought for these rights because they were the ones that were exploited.
Yeah. And what's interesting is that so the Illinois Occupational Diseases Act that I just talked about, it was foundational in forming the like OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health Administration, which is
Yeah.
in the States. So that was in the 70s. So they didn't even have
Wow.
OSHA until the 70s, which is like so
I had
wild to think about.
40 years after some of those cases. Wow.
Another interesting tidbit, which is like good and bad, is that so you know the Manhattan Project. Did you see Oppenheimer?
Yeah.
Oh my God, you did! Yay!
I did.
Yeah, you finally saw something that I also saw.
Yes. We are a Venn diagram. For
Because
once.
right now, Oppenheimer is the only overlap that we know of at this moment in heated rivalry. Maybe that'll come up later. I don't know. So the people that were working on the Manhattan Project, there were some protections for them in the 40s, and there was a direct result of what the Radium Girls went through because they knew that this was dangerous and they knew that people had died. So there was already laws in place and protections in place, PPE, if you will, for the people on the Manhattan Project. So it's like, I guess good and bad because also then they created an atomic bomb. So additionally, on August 5th, 1963, the US, Soviet Union, Great Britain signed the Limited Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, which prohibited the testing of nuclear weapons in outer space, underwater, or in the atmosphere. So that's good.
Yeah.
There was also a statute of limitations reform because, okay, so one of the barriers that the women faced in this particular case was the time limits on filing lawsuits. So at the time in New Jersey, there was a statute of limitations. So you had to claim it was like within 2 years of exposure or injury.
Which is tough because a lot of those things would not show up for years afterwards.
Yes, exactly. So like radiation sickness, it takes a long time to appear. So by the time the symptoms were there, the deadline had passed. So it actually ended up changing the statute of limitations, which mattered hugely for people, you know, like asbestos.
I remember our university library, there were like rooms that you could not go in because it was like asbestos is located here.
There's asbestos in my house, lots of it. Just don't hit anything with a hammer. So, oh my gosh, Sarah, we're at the end of my notes. How do you feel?
I feel great.
Do you feel like you learned something about radium today?
I feel like I learned so much about radium, and I feel like you have now sent my brain independently on so many different rabbit holes. Like I want to go down Marie Curie. I want to see Pierre Curie. I want to like go more into radium and specific like radioactive events.
That's an honor. That's an
Yeah.
honor to hear. And I hope that
Yeah.
anyone who's listening kind of feels the same way, or at least felt like they learned something, which is
Yeah.
what we're here for is some light learning.
Yeah, some light learning, some light politics, some light life lessons. I think one of the takeaways from today is that so much has changed since this time we've reviewed kind of like the 1800s to like early 1900s. So much has changed, yet so much is the same still. People are being exploited. People are being lied to about occupational health and safety standards. And the fact that we have some of these standards in place now is a very good thing. But I think it is interesting to draw parallels between historical abuses and like current situations. And
Well, one thing that I really felt when I was like doing this research is like we also kind of take for granted what we have done, and we forget how much so many people fought for these rights that we have and take for granted. I mean, even thinking about women that weren't allowed to go to university, if we're going right back to the beginning of the episode, like there were people that gave their lives for that and gave their time for that. And relatively in time, like if not that much time has passed since the late 1800s, early 1900s, like
No,
100 years is just a fucking blip.
it is just fucking blip. I think like going back and getting into the paradigm of individuals in that time period is so interesting. And I think that Pierre's a goat. I think that Marie's a goat. We can see that human beings have always been humans. And, there are some dudes that will lock their wife in an attic and take all the credit. But some dudes will, some dudes will just be your partner. So like hashtag not all men.
We're actually a men's rights podcast.
We're just waiting to be invited by Joe Rogan.
That's it. That's our goal,
That's the
our
goal.
full goal. That's why we're back into podcasting.
No, but I actually do feel like I learned a lot, and that was super interesting and not a rabbit hole that I have gone down whatsoever at all in my life.
Really?
So,
Okay, great.
No, not at all.
That is the goal with this pod, is for people, including you and me, to just learn something completely random and hopefully interesting. And I hope you can go tell your friends a little fun fact tomorrow about radium.
What was the book by Marie Curie? You got to put that in the show notes.
It's not by Marie Curie.
Not by, about.
Oh, yes. So the books, all of my research and all the books will be in the show notes, but that one's called Obsessive Genius.
You recommended several things, but let's be honest, that's the only one I'm going to read. So
it was really good. Barbara Goldsmith. Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us for our first episode back. We hope you liked it. Please take the time to rate and review and subscribe to our YouTube, because now we have YouTube. If you didn't know, you can watch us as well as listen. Do you have anything else you want to say, Sarah, before we sign off?
All I want to say is I am happy to be back in this space, but what we want is more deep dive ideas. So if you have anything interesting, random, weird, deep dive worthy of, please let us know, because we are always looking for additional things to fixate on.
Well,
all right.
Thank you all, and goodbye and good night.
Goodbye. Good night.